So recently, one of my followers sent me a message and he had a very interesting story. He was just 14 years old as he was growing up in California. He grew up troubled and would eventually get involved in a gang. This would of course lead to gang violence that would soon spill over to his mother's home. So his mom, who worked 3 jobs, had had enough. She had to do something. She decided it would be good for him to learn a little bit about his heritage from Mexico. He would end up going to visit with his grandfather on his father's side. Little did he know, it would change his life. It just so happens that his grandfather lived near the 7 Luminaries of Mexico. For those of you that don't know, the 7 Luminaries of Mexico are large craters. These craters have been around for generations, and oddly enough, they perfectly mirror the Big Dipper. So many suspect they were actually created by extraterrestrial craft from ETs that hailed from the Big Dipper. And the stories surrounding these craters would say the same thing. He stated that while he was there, you could see UFOs every night. Not only that, you could hear things going on underground. His grandfather would tell him stories passed down from generation to generation. Some of them he even got to witness, like the fact that the craters can grow massive crops. It's rumored they can grow mangoes the size of basketballs, heads of lettuce a meter tall. His grandfather would tell him that the ancient higher beings would come down and see his ancestors. Sometimes they would come from the skies, sometimes they would come from underground. But a certain group in particular would tell them that they could solve world hunger, and they would go on to show them how. The secret is sacred, and it truly has not been shared, but it's said they taught them how to use the energy from the craters. Years ago, the government would catch wind of it, so they would send officials out. But the locals were reluctant to share their secrets, so the government officials would end up calling it a hoax. But trust me, it is no hoax, and the stories will blow your mind. The one that moved me the most will challenge everything you've ever learned about the Aztec, Incan, and Mayan civilizations. His grandfather would explain that it all started when a group of Spanish explorers would land on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. The group would drop anchor and make their way to shore. When they first landed on the beach, they were greeted by a small fishing tribe that lived nearby. The Spanish sailors were in rough shape. They were starving and dehydrated. While the crew neared death, the only one that was in good health was the priest. As back then, they always took care of the priest before anybody. So while his men had one foot in the grave, he was in perfectly fine shape. The villagers would notice their condition and offer them help. Not only would they give them food and water, but they would heal them in a matter of minutes using an ancient technique learned from the higher beings. They would then take them to their village, which would be a mistake. Upon arrival, the crew was speechless. There was gold everywhere. Literally every building was covered. They had more gold than any of the men had ever laid their eyes on. Not only that, they seemed to have acquired technology. Tech acquired from the sky people. When asked where it came from, they pointed to the sky. The priest seemed unimpressed. Too, y'all. So after eating fruits and vegetables they had never eaten, foods they had never dreamed of, the vast amounts of gold, more gold than they had ever seen, they were absolutely amazed at how beautiful the little village was. But in the end, not even that took them back the most. When the villagers began showing their abilities. Abilities not just limited to their women and children being healers. After seeing all this, the priest grew worried. Later that night, when the conquistadors got back to their ship, he would immediately begin preparing for battle, telling the men that these abilities can never be shown to the world. So they must take out that village and any other surrounding in the morning. Little did they know the villagers were pretty smart people in themselves. So the chief would send a scout to watch the Spaniards. It wouldn't take him long to realize what was going on. He would turn and run back to the village, letting the chief know. The chief would tell him continue to the mother and father tribes, the Aztecs and the Mayans, warning them of the danger approaching. Upon hearing this, the Aztec emperor would send warriors to tell the Mayans. The Spanish would attack in the coming days. They would storm the village like madmen, ready to take out anything in their path. But as they approached, there were no warriors waiting. There was nobody ready for battle. They slowed the horses to a trot. The village was completely empty, gold and all. And when they made it to the Aztec and the Mayan empires, they were the same. No gold, no people. Empty. So his grandfather said what happened was, after finding out the Aztecs and the Mayans were visited by Mother Nature, creator of all, she would warn them of the fierce enemy at their doorstep. She would give each tribe a key and tell them to head south. So they would gather everything and flee to South America. Each tribe's emperor or leader, key in hand. When they finally come upon their destination, they know this is where they're supposed to be. Above is an example of what they looked for. When they saw this, each chief would slowly place the key in the puzzle. Instantly, they could hear mechanisms begin shifting within the wall. First, small intricate pieces moved, and then larger, until finally a large stone slab about 20 feet tall would shift out of their way. And what was revealed, absolutely mind-blowing. It would open up to a whole nother beautiful world. Standing right in front of them, a large portal. Mother Nature, creator of all, led them to a haven. At that moment, they'd tell their brave warriors they had to go back and to represent their tribes well. Here, they would die a warrior's death. The rest, elderly women and children, would enter the portal, from which they would never return. His grandfather states that he learned Mayans and Aztecs were love and light, that they were decent people and cared for one another, and that the people of his heritage have been misjudged the entire time, and that he hoped one day his story would be heard. Aztec and Mayan warriors would represent well and fight valiantly. A follower of mine's grandfather lived next to the 7 luminaries in Mexico. When he would go visit from Cali, he'd tell him about his ancestors. Some of the stories are crazy. I've been lucky enough he's actually been sharing them with me and telling me that I can share them with you. So I have been, and this is stuff you definitely want to hear. His grandfather stated that there's been 3 great wars on Earth. Wars of good against evil. He would state that the evil beings wanted to take Earth, and that during these times the world was highly technologically advanced, and many of the people were of a higher consciousness, including his ancestors, which I have reason to believe may have been the original Egyptians. Many years before the third war of good versus evil, they knew it was coming. So the good higher beings of love and light, which his people would refer to as the Sky People, tasked his ancestors with traveling the globe and warning other human factions. So they would travel to China, Australia, Russia, Europe, all over the globe. So as they got to each location, they would warn the people of the impending battle. They would build relationships with them and teach them of love and light and how to harness the Earth's energy. They did this by building pyramids. Using sacred geometry taught to them by the Sky People, they were able to build them mimicking the star constellations. They did this so at certain times throughout the year, when they lined up with their star constellation, they would harness that said star's energy. Not only that, they taught them how to harness the Earth's energy in themselves, their being. This made the people of the world in these times very powerful. They built such strong relationships at the locations that they went to, sometimes they would end up living there, or the people would end up coming back with them. This is why I believe they could have been the ancient Egyptians. They were a seafaring group that traveled the globe building pyramids. Makes sense. And what a lot of people don't know is the pyramids are actually earthquake-proof, and if a nuclear blast occurs nearby, they'll sustain. Shortly after, around 10,000 BC, the battle would take place with the evil alien faction. They would hide the women and children in deep underground caverns that had seawater in them. Here, they would be protected by the allied sea creatures, which I believe could have been mermaids. While their warriors, known as Mexicanos, would join the good alien beings and fight this grave enemy. They would use super advanced technological weapons that could literally incinerate their enemy to a pile of ashes. They had super speed and agility. They were faster than anyone on the battlefield. They could also move things with their mind. They would pick up large boulders and toss them, smashing the evil beings. He would also say that at this time, man could talk to animals, and they were part of the battle too. Even Bigfoot, he would claim that Bigfoot and man once had a long-standing relationship, that Bigfoot has been around for millennia, and that they are here to protect the portals to inner Earth. So the battle would rage for 1,000 years, eventually good prevailing. But right after, the Ice Age would take place, due to nuclear fallout. So one of my followers who lives in Cali has a grandfather in Mexico. His grandfather lives next to the 7 Luminaries of Mexico. These 7 craters are known for UFO activity. So when my guy went to stay with his grandfather for 9 months, he got to learn a lot about his heritage. And I'm gonna tell you, stick around, cause this shit you don't hear every day. His grandfather said his ancestors had contact with the Sky People. They would share secrets with his ancestors, making their lives on Earth easier. Here's some of the accounts from his father and his grandfather. He said they used to have gifts from the Earth in the dirt, water, and rocks. That they would rub a special dirt on them before hunts because it would completely camo them, almost invisible. That there was sand that you could roll through and you'd be fire resistant for 40 minutes to an hour. That ETs even showed his people a gooey type water. This water you could shape, and you could shape it to fit your head. It would allow you to stay underwater for 2 hours. Rocks that when crushed and rubbed on the bottom of your feet, would allow you to walk on water. Alright y'all, our boy Macho's back at it again, and just when I think his grandfather's accounts couldn't get any more interesting. The role his ancestors played were crucial to the victory in this Third Earth War. In this last war, both evil and good beings would partake from all over the galaxy. The war would take place around 10,000 years ago, or right around the same time as the last Ice Age. which actually makes sense because these advanced technological beings probably had some sort of super weapon that could create a sort of fallout or a ice age like event. They would state that the third war, just like the previous two, would last up to 1,000 years. Like I said, these battles are epic and they last a very long time. Now, I want you to pay attention to what I'm saying here, because this is important. It is said that many years before the Third Great War, his people knew it was coming. So his ancestors would task their greatest warriors, known as the Mexicados. They were tasked with traveling the globe and warning every faction of mankind of what was to come. His people would travel to China, Russia, Africa, Australia, you name it, they traveled there, not only to warn them, but to also enlighten them on their teachings that they learned from the sky people. This would make a huge difference in the coming war because they were teaching solidarity. And they were explaining to the people that we need to unite as one faction to defeat this grave enemy. Now the enemy, you ask? It's the Alpha Draconians. They would teach Mother Earth's people how to build massive pyramids that could harness the Earth's energy. This would in turn lead to longer lifespans for people so they could grow wiser and prepare that much better. In doing this, his people would build strong relationships worldwide. Some of the different peoples would come home with them, while in some cases his people stayed. And due to this world brotherhood that was built, none of the women and children had to see any of the war. Every last one of them from each human faction was spared. They were actually kept safe by the most trusted sea life. They were taken to giant underwater caves that had massive pockets of air that allowed them to stay there for years at a time. There, they would be protected by some of the most ancient beings on Earth, mermaids. See, it was important to protect the women because they were the birthers of children. They were the creators of future generations. And it was very important to keep the children safe because they were the minds of the future, just in case anything terrible happened. See, women and children were particularly targeted by the Dracos. The women because they wanted what was inside their stomachs for creating life. They wanted to manipulate our DNA, and the children for consumption only. And once they had structures that would withstand massive earthquakes and explosions, aka the pyramids, shortly after, the Third Great Earth War ensued, and battle covered the entirety of the planet. Both good alien factions of light and evil alien factions. The display of technology was something like we can't even fathom today. Many of us would almost call it magic, but it wasn't. It was real. The Mexicados, our man's warrior ancestors, played a very large and important part in the war. Their skills were like nothing we'd ever seen today. They could literally pick up large boulders with their minds and crush their opponent. The weapons they wielded had amazing abilities. They would literally incinerate the Alpha Draconians on the spot, reducing them to nothing but a pile of ashes. Spear and shield that were almost mythological. This epic battle would go on for 1,000 years until finally the Alpha Draconians would fall. They would be pushed back to the underground tunnels where they would immediately begin plotting for the next war. But this time they would take a different approach. They would infiltrate mankind. From the highest position of kings to politicians who ruled the world. And many think this war is pending as we speak. Now, if those of you that listened, did you catch that his ancestors traveled the world and built pyramids? This makes one kind of wonder. Could they have been the original ancient Egyptians? Now that we're finding pyramids all over the world, it's kind of up in the air as far as who and where the ancient Egyptians began or started. Of the places I named, all of them had pyramids, even Australia. It makes one think. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more awesome content.